Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is Chris Sims, writer for ComicsAlliance.com and the author of Downset Fight, Subatomic Party Girls, and I believe an upcoming Bill and Ted. Chris, welcome back to Comic Culture.
Thank you for having me. And those are all co-written with my writing partner, Chad Bowers, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because he has a kid. Oh. So he had to take care of Cooper today. So it is a pleasure to be here. I wish he was with me, but I'm doing this one solo.
Well, we're glad to have you here. Glad that you decided to come back for the third time. This, of course, is the round. If you get this right, you come back as Tournament of Champions.
Oh, this is exciting. This is exciting. I'm ready.
Now, the last time we spoke, we were talking about Downset Fight, which had yet to come out.
Yes.
It has come out.
It's out now.
I think it's one of the finest books I've read in the last year or so.
Oh, thank you.
I enjoyed the humor in it. And it's interesting because you wrote a compelling story with a lot of human drama, but at the same time it has some laugh-out-loud moments. And I'm just wondering how you and Chad kind of approach writing.
If it had been up to me, it probably would have not been as serious in parts as it ended up. Like I can tell you bits and pieces that we wrote, because when you have a co-writer like I do with Chad, a lot of times we'll write and rewrite stuff. Like I'll write a couple pages and send it to him, and he'll rewrite them and send them back to me. But there are a couple scenes that I know that I wrote, and there are a couple scenes that I know that Chad wrote. So the scene in the graveyard with Chuck and his dad at his mom's grave, which is probably the more serious and kind of more heartfelt scene in the book, that was almost entirely Chad's. But at the same time, the bear man coming into the bar to attack Chuck was also mostly Chad. So it's a good balance. But we kind of realized early on that it's such a weird premise that it would be really easy for it to just be that weird premise, and we wanted it to be a little bit more. So I guess we pulled it off, if you liked it. Mm-hmm. It actually recently got on the Young Adult Library Association's list of great graphic novels for teens for 2014.
Well, that's
so
fantastic.
that was, we were very happy that we got on the list. It's a big honor for us.
Well, this is a silly question. The book is not your traditional comic size. Is this the size that you had published the original issues in, or was this the size that you were originally thinking of working in?
No, there were actually no original issues.
Okay.
It's an original graphic novel. It was serialized on Comixology. It was serialized digitally, because when we wrote it, we did write it in chapters, and that was less because we were thinking of it as issues, and more because that's just a convenient way to break down the story, and we wanted to have the like, if you can see on the title pages, we've got the big chapter numbers that were, the big chapter numbers that were inspired by Jack Kirby. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to do kind of a tribute to Kirby, and it just ended up breaking down where we ended up with 6 chapters that were about the same length, about 20 pages each, 15 to 20 pages each. So when it was, before it was released in print, they did do a I think it was 6 weeks of run-up, serializing it digitally on Comixology. As far as the size goes, that was all from Oni Press, which is the publisher. As for why, I'm not really sure, but I know they do multiple formats. Obviously they're the publisher of Scott Pilgrim, which is a manga format book. This one's a little bit bigger that they use for other titles, including Us. There were a lot of books that came out around the same time as Us, like Buzz and Mega Go-Go, that are around the same size. So I think it was just a format they were experimenting with.
Okay.
But it looks good in bookstores. So.
Well, that's true. It does stand out on the shelf because your standard comic, and I'll hold up Planet Gigantic, which you don't write. But we did speak to Eric Grissom earlier.
There's another one of mine right there next to it.
I wanted to, it's pacing, Chris. This is what we TV types do.
Okay.
But you can see the size difference between these two books. I'm not sure what camera's on, so I'll just point at all of them. Now, one of the things I really like is that you do have the humor. You've got this father-son tale that's going on throughout, and then you've got perhaps the most ridiculous concept where you have mascots working together to defeat the lead character, Fearless Fairlane?
Yeah, Fearless Chuck Fairlane.
And
disgraced former football player, right, turned high school football coach, turned folk hero.
And the way that you work the story around that, there's twists and turns. It actually, you're not sure where it's going to go, and every time you think you've got it figured out, you don't, which is kind of fun. Now, one of the things that I did, we talked about this before we started taping, I was thinking of actors that would fit into this, because it almost reads as a great buddy film. And I was thinking Craig Robinson would have made the perfect Fearless Fairlane.
Oh, that would have been good.
And you were saying that your inspiration when you were writing
we thought a lot about Terry Crews. Chuck's a bit thicker than Terry Crews, but I just, like, he looks like a superhero. And the things that we see Chuck doing in that book, because the original idea for it was to do a superhero comic. It was actually a pitch, and I think I mentioned this last time I was on the show, that Chad and I came up with a pitch for a kind of obscure Marvel character called NFL Super Pro, which they co-produced with the NFL. And we were going to bring him back, something that nobody wanted. Like, obviously, we actually talked to Marvel editors at conventions. They're like, no, don't pitch that. That's not going to happen. So we kind of reworked it quite a bit, and that's one of the reasons that he fights the mascots, because what's the closest thing to a dude in a rhino costume is a dude in an elephant costume. But you see him doing such monumental feats of strength. Like, the first thing he does in the book is beat up 2 football teams by himself. And so we were thinking about, like, who looks like they could do that? Oh, Terry Crews. Like, he's gigantic. He's a huge, huge man. And also is very, very funny. So that's who we were thinking of. One of the original designs for Al, actually, was Ed O'Neill, who has kind of the kind of dumpy, schlubby, but still kind of conniving and look to him that we really liked.
Now, when you write, do you often find yourself casting from people that you know or from Hollywood? Because obviously you know Terry Crews and Ed O'Neill.
Yeah.
Do you think in terms of like an actor or a character and how that would fit into your story, or are you creating out of whole cloth?
Sometimes, because it's really, when we have a picture in our heads, Chad and I developed this on our own, and neither one of us is an artist. Chad can draw a little bit. I'm terrible at drawing, but I enjoy doing it. I think I've done sketches for you in the past that are just awful. But when you develop something, you kind of get the picture in your head. And Scott Kowalczyk, who is the artist of Down South Fight, was actually brought in by Oni. So he wasn't someone that we'd worked with before, but he was someone that we did really enjoy working with. And I hope we get to work with him again. He's great. He just recently did an issue of Batman 66 for DC's digital stuff that was a King Tut issue, which I would have loved to have worked on with him because it's so great. But it helps to have a shorthand where it's like, oh yeah, we need a guy who looks kind of like this guy, or kind of like this guy, or has this sort of attitude. I know that the look that Scott brought to it for Al was actually like a Michael Caine. It was very close to Michael Caine, which I thought was a really interesting choice, but it's also he's a guy who the more you look at him, the tougher he looks. Like, you see him and he's like, oh yeah, old Michael Caine. He's with the big glasses. But then you kind of realize, like, yeah, he's kind of a tough guy. Right. So it's fun to have those conversations. Obviously it's not on the level of, putting a picture of a guy in the graphic novel like you see sometimes. And to be honest, we never really thought, we had a lot of fun talking about Terry Crews as Chuck, but we never really thought that it would happen. Right. So we didn't approach it as a movie pitch, but it's fun to have those conversations.
Yeah, I find in my writing, sometimes if you give a voice to a character, even if it's someone you know, it helps you flesh that character out and give it a little bit more depth. And if it speaks to you as a writer, then you hope it will speak to the audience later on.
Yeah. Chad and I were actually just writing something last night where we got on Skype and we're just going through a script line by line, and it sounds so silly to say it, but we were like kind of having the conversations as characters to see how the lines sounded. So there were bits and pieces of the script we were writing last night where it was just he would write one panel, and then I would go down to the next panel and write the response. Actually, the characters were having a conversation as we were having the conversation and playing off each other. So that's one of the big benefits of working with a co-writer, especially one that Chad and I have been working together for 7.5 years on comics. So it's fun to bounce ideas off and get those voices, do those impressions over Skype. So
that's true. We're going to move on to Subatomic Party Girls.
It's a good one.
It is a good one. What strikes me about it is that it's very similar to those classic tales of Josie and the Pussycats, or even Jem.
Love both of those.
And was that something that you were thinking of when you and Chad were coming up with this?
Oh, definitely. That actually comes out of... Chad has had the title Subatomic Party Girls for as long as I have known him. He has always wanted to do a book with that title. because he loves puns. And Erica and I were talking one day about how much we'd love to do Josie and the Pussycats, and especially Josie and the Pussycats in space, which is, if you take a good concept and you put it in space, it becomes a great concept. So we were just talking about how we wanted to do that, and Chad's title, Subatomic Party Girls, popped back into my head. And so I called up Chad and I was like, hey, I think I figured out what we can do with that title. And so we kind of hammered it together. Erica did the character designs, and they were, Libby and Vet were spot on from the start. And I think Cleo took 2 or 3 designs before we really liked what we'd gotten. But it was really, it all came together really well. The book came together really fast. It was an easy one to write. I'm sure it was easier for us to write than it was for Erica to draw, because all we have to do is say, hey, design a spaceship. Right. And then she's the one who has to do it. Yeah, it was really fun working with her. And it's great seeing her now working for Marvel on the Squirrel Girl book, which is phenomenal. And has a very, like visually, it has a very similar tone to what we're doing there. It's very kind of goofy and silly. And whereas our book was full of cat people and hot pink Pegasi.
I think Pegasi is the plural.
Pegasi, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because you write on Comics Alliance, you write a lot about superhero comics, and yet what you are writing as a comic book writer is different. I mean, it's from a whole different approach. It's a whole different genre, and I'm just wondering where that comes from.
Well, it comes from kind of simple necessity. Like, you know, DC and Marvel kind of have a lock on superheroes. There's very rare occasions where other publishers and other creators can kind of break into the superhero market, like Robert Kirkman with Invincible. But Invincible is kind of the last time that a pure superhero book that wasn't a DC or Marvel book broke through and became a huge success. If you look at what's successful in the world of indie comics, it's people who are doing other genres and catering to an audience that's not necessarily covered by what DC and Marvel are doing. You know, Hellboy is very superheroic, but at its heart, it's kind of a supernatural adventure book. The Walking Dead, obviously, no superheroes, pure horror. So we kind of try to bring a superheroic sensibility to these other genres. Chad and I are both huge superhero fans, obviously. It's where our hearts are. But at the same time, you know, I want to write a Batman story. I don't necessarily want to write a story about a Batman analog that I kind of just filed the serial numbers off. Because the thing we love about those universes is the history in those universes and the way those universes work and the relationships between the different characters. And I know people that have done great stories with analogs. Chris Robertson's Edison Rex is a very kind of thinly veiled Lex Luthor story that's really, really great. And I just read a book called Danger Club that's getting ready to finish up now by Landry Walker and Eric Jones. That is kind of a fun take on the Teen Titans. Mm-hmm. But those, for us, it's so much easier to just go, okay, well, what if NFL Super Pro was actually this other guy? And it's fun to do that. You know, my kind of my ideal character is Dracula, who I did a book about for a few issues. Because I feel like Dracula is like Batman, or like Scrooge McDuck. He's a character that can do anything. He can go anywhere and have any kinds of adventures, because we've got 100 years of Dracula stories backing that up.
I think this is the first time I've ever heard someone say, Dracula's like Batman, and Scrooge McDuck, he can do anything.
But that's the thing, though. Like, I look at the Batman comics that I like the Batman comics that I love, and I love, you know, Year One with the kind of gritty 80s urban crime stories. I love the Brave and the Bold stuff where Batman's going to space. I love Justice League where he's hanging out on the moon with Superman. I love it all. He's a character that has that history of doing that stuff in all kinds of different genres. And obviously people have what they prefer. You know, some people only like the Frank Miller Batman. Some people only like the Bob Haney Batman, which are two completely different ends of that spectrum. With Scrooge McDuck, it's the same way, because the way he's built, if you go back and read those Carl Barks comics, all there needs to be is something valuable, and Scrooge can go anywhere in the world. He's a world-traveling adventurer. He can go to, you know, I mean, you played the NES game, right? You guys played DuckTales on the NES. You can go to the moon. You can go to King Solomon's Mines. You can go to Transylvania. You can do anything with him. And I feel like that is an asset that the best characters have, because it never gets stale. Because as soon as it gets stale, you can switch it up. With Hellboy, as soon as Mike Mignola gets tired of doing the kind of short ghost stories, Hellboy can leave the BPRD, and then the supporting characters get to have a chance in the sun. Like it's a really fun thing to think about characters being really adaptable and being able to move between genres. And when I think about my favorite characters, Spider-Man can do that. The Thing can do that. Dracula can do that. Scrooge McDuck can do that. So it's fun to think about those characters in those terms.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is it about, Jem was sort of a sensation in the 80s for a few years.
I do love Jem.
And was there to support a toy line. It was an animated series to support a toy line, much like G.I. Joe or the Transformers. But kind of forgotten until I think you're responsible for bringing Jem back.
I wish I could take credit for that. I
like
really wish I could. I don't think I can, but I wish I could. Because Jem's weird. Jem's really weird. And it's another one of those characters that seems way more complicated than it needs to be. Like, she has a secret identity for no reason, except for that she once told her boyfriend she had a secret identity and now can't tell him she doesn't. Because he hates deception and hates liars.
Well, who doesn't?
Exactly. I love deception and liars. That's why I'm in comics. But yeah, Jem is one of those shows that I kind of stumbled across by accident because Hasbro had a TV network for a while, so they were showing G.I. Joe and Jem and Transformers. So I would if there was an episode of G.I. Joe on that I liked, which I'm a huge G.I. Joe guy, as you know, if you follow me on Twitter. So I just kind of stumbled across Jem and I realized, oh, this is every bit as weird as G.I. Joe. This is just weird and hot pink instead of weird and camo. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I became really fascinated with, and I started writing about it. And I mean, I would love to take credit for the Jem revival, but like it was happening regardless because it hadn't been done yet. Mm-hmm. We had G.I. Joe movies and Transformers movies. We had not yet had a Jem movie.
And it's interesting too because it's like Josie and the Pussycats, or even like the early Scooby-Doo. There'd be an adventure going on, and then in the middle of it there'd be a musical number.
Yes.
And that's something that's a little different, especially if you're trying to do a comic that's inspired by those two.
That was the funniest thing about doing Party Girls, was that people would always ask us what they sound like, and our answer would be like, "Oh, they sound like your favorite band, like whatever you like."
So there's never been a thought in your mind to go out and scout talent like the Archies did and get Don Kirshner out of the grave to produce an album for you?
Not with that. With that, the funniest thing for us was coming up with song titles, which Chad really liked. I think Chad had hand wrote out a list of his the top 10 best Beryllium Steel tracks. But then there's a part in there where they talk about doing hymns, because if you haven't read Subatomic Party Girls, it's about...
I'm just going to hold this up.
Please do.
Anyone at home wants to take a look at the
cover. It's available digitally. It's 99 cents an issue.
Wow.
It's a great deal. It's about a girl group, a three-piece power trio, who get transported across space into a world where they have no rock and roll. They only have Bob Seger. So they consider Bob Seger songs to be hymns. So there's a part where they're talking about, they're going to play hymns, but the girls don't know that. So they're trying to figure out what religious music they know. And I think it's Libby who says that they do a dance pop version of Hallelujah, which Chad wrote that and then emailed me and he was like, "Look at the script. I want you to see what I just wrote." Because that's such a weird, how could you do that? That is a song that could not possibly exist. So that's what we had fun with in there. But it's always tricky to do, music in a completely silent medium like comics, because you either have to kind of rely on something that people know. Like there was a big scene in Sex Criminals, the Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky book, where they're singing, I think it's Fat Bottom Girls. Singing along with the radio, and they couldn't get the rights to the songs. They just pasted narration over the word balloons, which I thought was really funny because you know that song. Mm-hmm. But there's also there's a Bob's Burgers comic coming out right now where it's divided into 3 stories, and it's always about the kids. So you have 8 pages of Tina's erotic friend fiction, and then you have 8 pages of Louise trying to solve a mystery, and the last thing is always Gene doing a musical, and it's. You kind of have to figure out for yourself how the song is going because it's just written as kind of a poem. It's a weird trick. I don't know why so many people like to do it in comics because it's so hard to make it work at all. But it's fun. It's fun to have fun.
I think there was, I forget if it was a Justice League or a Batman where there's somebody who's using rock music. Maybe it was a really bad Superman.
Sounds good. I'm into it already. Okay,
where
rock music.
It's a rock music festival, and they're singing songs, and it's about how you have to, break the law, and all these people get hypnotized by the music. And I think it was Superman. I think it was a Kurt Swan issue, and he's got to stop them. And of course, they're going to call him a square and everything else. And yeah, it would always be these terrible lyrics written by middle-aged men who had no sensibility of what today's music was about.
Yeah, it's someone once described greeting cards to me as a conversation between the 60-year-old writer, the 40-year-old purchaser, and the 20-year-old recipient. And comics are like that too, where you have these comics where an older writer is trying to figure out what the kids are saying for the preteens picking up Superman at the newsstand. It's always really fun.
Yeah, the hip lingo of the street.
Yeah, there was actually just an issue. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. There was an issue of Grayson where he has to bust up a rock concert where they're using evil psychic vibes to drive people to riot. That is a plot that comes back a surprising amount in comics.
Wasn't that Cold Slither in G.I. Joe?
Cold Slither is my favorite example because they're meant to have subliminal messages. But the actual lyrics to the song include "Do not resist, 'cause Cobra is strong," which that's not subliminal. That is liminal. That is an actual lyric, and it takes them a long time to figure out they are the problem.
Well, G.I. Joe really wasn't known for their intellectual prowess.
They don't. They kind of lag behind a lot.
They can't hit anything. So.
Well, it was a cartoon for kids.
Still upset about that.
Okay, well, when you can go back in time and make the most violent 80s cartoons you can imagine. Tell you what, watch Jem, because that cartoon is shockingly violent. The Misfits do try to murder Kimber with a volcano at one point.
I missed out on all of the Jem stuff. I'm very upset. I'm going to have to go back and try and find it. I know G.I. Joe and Transformers were on Netflix. I'll have to see if Jem is.
Jem's on there.
Well, there we go. So now I've got my weekend set.
I can assure you.
Now, one of the things that you write every week is Ask Chris for comicsalliance.com.
Yeah, because in addition to writing comics, I'm also a comics critic in my day job.
And it's amazing, first off, how many articles you're able to come up with every week. I think now you're reviewing the Batman 66 DVD or Blu-ray box set.
Yeah, I'm doing a complete episode guide to Batman 66, which is really fun for me because it's... I did the 92 X-Men animated series, which was more about me going back and trying to figure out if this thing that had a real big impact on me when I was 10 years old was still any good. It's not. It is a frequently terrible show, but kind of admirable in some ways because they really do go into X-Men comics in the era where it's the most convoluted and complicated soap opera story and put it directly on TV. Like they don't do what Batman the Animated Series did, which is kind of pare it down to its essentials. They just went completely, this is what the X-Men are. They're weird and complex. But when that was over, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I had a lot of requests to do the Spider-Man cartoon from, I think it was 93 or 94, which I also watched when I was a kid, and I remember really liking. And I didn't really want to do that because I had about 50 episodes into that X-Men guide, I was ready to be done. But then right as I was finishing it, Batman 66 came out on DVD and Blu-ray, and there was kind of a big revival of that. So I'm about 13 episodes, and episode 13 was the one that went up this week, that went up today. So that is something, I've always loved that show. I'm glad that it's finally getting, people are kind of acknowledging how good it really is. So that's really fun for me to do.
And the other thing that you write Ask Chris. Mm-hmm. And frequently you get asked questions on, the best comic based on toys, which is obviously G.I. Joe. Or the question you had this past Friday for Valentine's Day was about the greatest love story in comics. And you said it was Big Barda and Mr. Miracle, Scott Free, the greatest escape artist. And that brings us to Jack Kirby.
Yes.
Who is the undisputed king of comics.
The greatest comic creator of all time.
But his writing, when he was with Stan Lee versus when he was actually getting the chance to put the words in, becomes Well, world's different. And I just was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I love Kirby's writing. Kirby as an artist, I think, is phenomenal, obviously. I feel like Kirby as an artist is someone that you have to get used to. Chad has a similar story where he talks about how he would ask his mom to buy him the Ugly comics when he was a little kid, and meaning Jack Kirby stuff. And I remember getting really into the X-Men in the early 90s, in the Jim Lee and the Andy Kubert era, and seeing the original X-Men comics by Kirby and thinking they were so bad. And to be fair, they're not Lee and Kirby's best work. But Kirby as an artist, you kind of get used to, and you kind of see it for what it is. You have a magic summer when you're 14, and you kind of get like, oh, this is really dynamic and exciting, and the way that he positions the things. He always does the close-up on the eyes, which is one of my favorite things. And then you realize that Kirby the writer is even more over the top than Kirby the artist. It has been described, I think Fraction described it as word jazz, because it's not so much writing as it's these, everything is a bold statement with 2 to 5 exclamation points, and everything is like monumentally over the top. The issue of Mr. Miracle that I was reading for the column that I wrote last Friday, the next issue blurbs, and the next issue blurbs are my favorite things, because they're so monumentally over the top. It was, it's about Scott and Barta going back to Apocalypse, and it's next issue, Apocalypse, where Holocaust is a household word. It's like, wow, that's a big statement to make.
Well, I'm getting told we have to wrap up. Chris, the half hour has just flown by. I'd like to thank you so much for coming back to Comic Culture.
I can't believe that was a half hour already.
And I'd like to thank everyone at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again next time.